This might be my favourite classic Doctor Who story yet, but why is that? Okay, so this video is basically just going to be an edited down version of the Seeds of Doom review that I've had up for a couple months on my Patreon and for members, where I've been doing quite a few classic Who reviews among some other exclusive content. If that's something you're interested in, I have those linked down below so you can become a patron or a member. But this video is just one of those reviews edited down a little bit. So if you want to see more of these and the unedited versions, you can see them on my Patreon or by becoming a YouTube member. And I'm going to be doing some more of these in the future. Now that we've got Tales of the TARDIS, I'll probably focus on some of the Tales of the TARDIS episodes for a little bit, and I also have a few other plans for exclusive content on the Patreon and memberships too. But with that being said, let's get into the review. I think from what I remember watching this, I was definitely thinking this was my favourite one that I'd seen so far. I've watched a couple more stories since this that maybe might have been better, I'm not really sure. Throughout the whole time watching it, I was thinking this is the best one I've watched so far, even over Genesis of the Daleks, which, like I did say, it was great, and I do see why Genesis is the highest rated classic story, but I just knew this was my favourite one I'd watched so far. Obviously, one of the things I want to talk about first is something that a lot of people probably noticed. It seems to be inspired by The Thing, or at least the first two parts of this 6-parter, but obviously this was actually before the film The Thing, which was in 1983. So some people are like, oh, did this part of the story inspire The Thing? It actually is the other way around, which you might be thinking, how's that possible when The Thing came out after this story? The film The Thing, first of all, it was a remake of an earlier film from, I believe, the 50s. That itself, I'm pretty sure, was based on a book. So a lot of people think, oh, did this inspire the famous 1980s film The Thing? No, this story was basically just ripping, or for the first two parts was basically just ripping off that film. Anyway, the main villain, I guess not the main villain, that's a separate thing, but the main monster are the Krynoids, which I think are really cool. This seed which grows into this plant and infects people, which I think is really cool, and I think it was a really creepy design. And the first time they revealed the first victim, when he's in the like the med bay bit or whatever it's called, you already know he's a bit infected, and you can see on his face he's a little bit infected, but they pulled the sheet from over his chest and he's covered in just the plant like Krynoid stuff, and that was genuinely like really scary. Like, you can tell it's not real, but it's still like genuinely like a terrifying moment, and I can imagine it would have been a lot more impactful at the time. Also, Tom Baker in this story, I don't know if he was drunk or what, but he's just so funny in this story compared to some of the other ones I've seen, particularly in those first couple of parts.
Turn around, Doctor. Facing this way. Okay, stop talking.
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had perfect pitch.
What happened to him?
Who, Wolfgang Amadeus? Oh, him. Oh, he died.
The Krynoids aren't actually the main villain in this, they're just like the monster or the alien of this story. The main villain himself is Harrison Chase, who is a very unique and interesting villain for a Doctor Who story, at least for the classic ones that I've seen, because he's just a guy that's really obsessed with plants. To begin with, I was like, surely like somebody has like convinced him to help the Krynoids, or maybe even that he'd been brainwashed or something like that. He is just a guy who is really obsessed with plants and will do anything to get all these different plants in his collection. He's willing to kill people for these plants. He blows up the Arctic base with bombs just for these plants. He's just seriously obsessed with plants, which I think is very interesting and unique motivation. Continuing with Harrison Chase, he's also got his henchmen, which I think were quite cool characters, because, you know, you've got the one who's there, he's really taking this as an opportunity to just be like as violent as possible, maybe taking an opportunity to kill some people, and I think he's a really interesting character. And then you've got the other guy who's also a botanist that's working for Chase, but he's been sent off with this henchman as well, who you can tell just does not want to hurt anyone, and he doesn't really want to get involved. And I think that's a really cool dynamic for these two henchmen, but he's also the one that gets turned into the main Krynoid. And you do feel quite bad for him because of how you can tell he's not like a violent guy, and he doesn't want to be involved in all this. So you do feel quite bad that Chase kind of uses him as a bit of an experiment at a certain point after he accidentally gets infected. The pacing of this story works really well. Like, a lot of the time these 6-part stories go on for way too long and they start to get a little bit tedious and boring at certain parts. But with this one, I don't know, I think it works really well, and it's structured in a certain way that it doesn't become as boring, because there's almost like 3 acts to this 6-parter. Like, the first 2 parts are the bits that are set in the Arctic, which is where they're doing the whole kind of The Thing kind of homage or whatever you would call it. Then the second 2 parts is when we're obviously back in England in Mr. Chase's house, but there's no Krynoid at this point. There's just obviously the seed. The main threat there is Mr. Chase and his henchmen. And then when you get to the last two parts, that's when they're trapped in the grounds of the house, this time with the Krynoid after the botanist guy has been turned into the Krynoid. And so that's why I think the pacing of this kind of works a lot better. That structure and that pacing just kind of really allows it to work better and to flow better than most other 6-parters that I've seen. The ending of it, I guess, is a little bit of a cop-out because it is just kind of like unit are there and they're ready to blow up the house with the massive Krynoid in it, and all of a sudden they just figure out a way to get out of there and then unit blow it up, and that's kind of how it ends, which I think could have been better. And also, like, I think Nicholas Courtney was meant to be in this as the Brigadier, but he couldn't do it because of scheduling or something like that. I'm pretty sure it's the last like proper appearance of unit, at least for a little while. It would have been nice if we could have got the Brigadier in there instead. I guess they didn't know that at the time, so you know, it's whatever, but it would have just been nice to have. So that was my review of the Seeds of Doom. Like I said, if you want to see more of these classic reviews, the unedited full versions of them, and any future classic reviews and exclusive content, you can become a YouTube member down below or join the Patreon by clicking here.